You're listening to the Adventurous Reinvention podcast. I'm Allison Boyle, aka She Dreams of Alpine, and this is the show that's dedicated to all the adventurous spirits out there who have either been transformed by the outdoors or are interested in what it looks like to step into a new, adventurous, and courageous kind of identity in their life. It doesn't matter what your background is in the outdoors, what age you're starting at, or where you grew up. If you're curious about the outdoors and using adventure as a way to reinvent yourself, you're in the right place. I'll be sharing all kinds of personal adventure stories, lessons I've learned from the mountains, teaching what I know about the outdoors and leadership, and interviewing some amazing adventurous women all along the way. I've been coaching women on becoming safe, confident, and self-sufficient backpackers and leaders of their own adventurous lives since 2018, and I know exactly what big fears and self-doubts can pop up along the way. I have so much to share with you, so let's dive in. Okay, hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 2 of the Adventurous Reinvention podcast. I'm so happy you're here. If you are new to the show, welcome. I did a kind of part 1 version of this episode, which was about kind of like my personal adventurous reinvention. I wanted to kind of share that behind the scenes and what that looked like for me and my story. So today is part 2, where I'm going to talk about my adventurous reinvention going from being a full-time engineer and to what I'm doing today, which is a full-time outdoor educator and coach. So if you missed episode 1, where it was more talking about my adventurous reinvention, like becoming outdoorsy and adventurous, because I used to be from Texas, basically not outdoorsy at all in any way, and then moved to California after college. And after I had gotten a divorce at a young age, I did a year of yes, which took me to saying yes to my very first backpacking trip. That is the first part of my story, so definitely go check it out if you missed it. But this episode is going to be all about kind of how I got into outdoor education, becoming a coach, and building She Dreams of Alpine, which is my business that I have today. So during all of that time that I was kind of like growing and exploring my new adventurous identity after, going on that very first backpacking trip that I did in Half Dome, I was also an engineer working a classic kind of 9-to-5 corporate job. So basically, I worked on spreadsheets, behind the scenes, I did project management, and I did a lot of financial forecasting, just boring engineer stuff, right? So I was an engineer by day, and then as I was getting into the outdoors and like falling in love with the outdoors and adventure and all those things, I was exploring that love for the outdoors by weekend. So I was your classic weekend warrior. I would work all week. And then as soon as I could, because at that time, when I was at first an engineer, at least, I was single at first. And then, I didn't have any kids. I just left after work and I would go to the mountains. I wanted to spend as much time as possible learning and honing my craft and getting more experience in the outdoors, going on more adventures. I really had gotten into like mountaineering and rock climbing and obviously backpacking as well and hiking as much as possible, and like kind of starting to build my adventurous community as well and doing as many learning opportunities as I could. I was just all in and in pursuing that lifestyle. So that is kind of what I did. I did engineering by day and then, the adventurous thing by weekend. And for about 6 years into my engineering career, that's all that I did. And I just was all in on kind of building that identity, building my skills, and just really enjoying being that person, right? And then about 6 years into my engineering career, I went on a backpacking trip with my now husband, Michael, and my best friend, Ashima, and her husband, Karthik. We went on a trip to do the Trans-Catalina Trail, which is a really amazing trail in California. I always recommend this to my clients and my students if they're looking for a good first-time backpacking trip experience that feels a little less scary, but still feels like wild and beautiful and all these things. It's a great trail to start on because you go to this island and there's not really any like animals you need to worry about or be concerned about. the water situation is fairly easy. The campsite situation is probably the trickiest part to figure out, but you just get permits. There's designated sites. I just think it takes a lot of the mind drama out of backpacking where you can still go and experience the trail. So that's like a little bit of an aside. I think it's a great trail. It's beautiful. It is a little harder physically than you might think, it being on an island. But you can still train to do that, or you can do sections of it. It's a great place to kind of dabble in hiking and backpacking. So we went and did this. It had been a bucket list trail for me and my friends. And I had gotten all the permits, or the campsite permits, and we did this in April of 2018. So it ended up being one of those like amazing weekends. The trail was as beautiful as we had imagined. We had great weather. I was with amazing people. Like, I was with Michael. I was with my best friend. These are people I would spend every day with if I could, right? And I remember I was walking with Michael. We were kind of like at a pace where our friends were somewhere else, maybe ahead or behind. I don't remember. But I was walking alongside with Michael, and we just started dreaming about, like, talking about like how amazing that experience was. And I remember I said to him something to the effect of like, I wish we could do this all the time. Like, I just wish, like, I felt that longing. It was just like this deep internal longing that just appeared to me. Of course, like, I had thought that before. Everyone does. People who are outdoorsy, they like want to do that all the time, but it was different this time. It like felt a little bit different. It's like, I wish we could do this all the time. And like Michael and I spent time talking about, you know, as we hiked, all the places we still wanted to go, all the places we still wanted to climb and hike at and backpack at. And then we started talking about like wanting more location freedom. Me in particular, like with my job, there were only certain places I could work. You know, time-wise, this was before remote work was even really a thing. And I don't even know if this would have been possible for what I was doing. But I wanted more time flexibility. Like, you know, if it's a beautiful Wednesday morning and I want to go for a hike, like I wanted the flexibility to do that instead of having to like adhere to this really strict schedule. So I was craving those things. We talked about the countries we wanted to visit and like how we'd like to live in a van for a while. And one of our dreams still to this day is like owning a sailboat, doing that, being adventurous with a sailboat. So we were talking about all the things, and it was really building up that desire to do it, right? So after that backpacking trip, like there was just a shift. I knew this is something that I wanted to explore, and I couldn't like drop it. Like it wasn't something that I could like not pay attention to anymore. So I came home, and being the engineer that I am, like I'm a numbers person. So I came home and I was like, do the numbers. Does the math? And so I like got my spreadsheets out. I was thinking about like our budgets and like, you know, how could we make this happen? Because at the time I didn't have any kind of side hustle, any kind of job, extra income. I had just the engineering job. And so I was like, okay, so we would need to save money for this to happen. And it would probably look like a year off to travel. So that's kind of where my head was at when I went home to crunch the numbers. But in general, like, I feel like I had gotten to this point where it sort of felt a little bit silly to me that I was nearly 30 at that time. And I was holding on to this idea that I had to like, I kind of just felt this urge. I was like, do I have to be realistic? Do I have to keep a steady corporate job? Is this really how it's the only way that it can be done? Like, I don't know. I was really grappling. When I became an engineer, I kind of just saw that this was the thing that I was going to like do for life. And I just come from a really traditional, you know, Texas conservative background, and people, you know, got a good job and you stuck with it for like 30 years and you didn't leave. So that's how I always thought. But I think my reinvention into having a more adventurous identity also opened up this possibility of like, is it true? Like, do I have to do it that way? So I was kind of getting tired of thinking that way. I was like, other people do these really cool creative things. Like, why not me? Why can't I like maybe even take a year off and just go travel? Like, I don't know. I was thinking differently. I was following that like line of thinking in that path, right? So shortly after that trip, crunching the numbers, I decided like we're going all in on this dream of taking a year off to travel. Thankfully, Michael was all in he was at least mostly in on my all-inness. I have this ability to have a lot of optimism. And when I set my mind on something, I'm good at like, this is the way we should go. Like, it is going to be amazing. Like I have that optimism for myself. And so like, I'm able to convey that optimism with other people. So he was in, I had showed him the numbers and I was like, let's do it. Like we should do it. And we were really excited about it. And at this point, I hadn't even considered building my own business. So that wasn't even really like part of the discussion. What I originally thought was like, we're going to save up, we'll downsize our belongings, which I also was really interested in. You know, I feel like we had collected so much stuff. It felt like freeing thinking about having less things in our life. We also knew we wanted to get a van. You know, years prior to this, since we had been really outdoorsy for like 7 years at this point, or I had, you know, Michael's story is a little bit different than mine, but, you know, he was my partner. You know, Michael and I spent almost when I met him, gosh, what year did I meet him in? 2014. We started dating, I think, which was like shortly after I started going all in on the outdoor stuff. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes. We were spending like every weekend together in the outdoors, and he had his Jeep and I had my Subaru at the time. And we would go to these places, go climbing, and we would sleep in the back of our Subaru and our Jeep. So we knew a van and we would camp. It would be pretty like low key, like not anything fancy. So we knew we would like a van. A van was an upgrade. We were not concerned, would we like a van? We were just like, wow, this will really be a lot. This will be an amazing thing to have. And so we were going to get a van, and we thought we'll do it for at least a year, like take a year off from working full time and just travel and see the US in our van and see where it leads us. And I kind of figured, I think at this time, I figured I'd probably end up going back to engineering after that year off of travel. But as curiosities and dreams often do, one thing led to the next thing. And before I move on in the story, like I kind of want to have a little mini rant or like emphasize something again before I move on. I want to emphasize that quote, one thing led to the next thing. And I think so many people, they often look at, you know, they might look at my story, which is somebody's, 5-6 year transformation at this point, and think I could never do that. But all you need to do for any kind of transformation is to decide that I'm going to follow this one thing that I'm curious about and this one thing that interests me and kind of like lights me up and gives me that excited feeling, maybe even a little bit scary, a little bit like uncertain. I find that they kind of follow each other, and trust that it will lead you to the next thing, whatever it is. So for example, like I love like Carla's program, the 52 hike challenge. Hopefully we'll have her on the podcast at some point, but it's like this one thing people can like latch onto. Like, I want to get more into hiking. I want to hike one hike every week. And it's simple and it's small, it's achievable, and it's something that can get you going, and it can lead to the next thing. And you don't have to start that challenge knowing what your transformation is going to look like. You can just know, like, I'm going to go all in on this transformation and let it lead you to the next thing. Or similarly to people who join our Backpacking Badass program, it's like, they come in, they're like, I just know that I want to stop waiting around on other people to invite me along on adventures. And I want to like be the leader. I want to take ownership of my adventures. I want to learn how to backpack. That is like the one thing that leads them to the next thing. So you don't have to have, all the pieces figured out. Just, am I curious enough to explore this, and let it lead you to the next thing. So that's my little mini rant, and kind of something I really wanted to emphasize here. So for me, the one decision of taking a year off to travel in our van led me to thinking about, well, what if I could make some side income so that we could support our travels a little bit more? Which that thought led me to being like, well, what does side income look like, right? So I, at the time, had this job. Well, it was the same job, but the particular role I was in had me driving 45 minutes out to a field in the morning and 45 minutes out back to where I lived. So every day I was like driving almost 2 hours a day, and maybe sometimes 2 hours if there were bad traffic. So I started binging podcasts, like the ones that I was listening to at the time. I listened to a lot of Tim Ferriss, and there was also this podcast. I have no idea if it's still around. I don't listen to it anymore, but it was really great for me at the time. And I think it was called Side Hustle School. And for me, this was like my entry into hearing other people's creations, like what they had done to build a side hustle, something on the side to bring in income for themselves. And the Tim Ferriss podcast was more just like opening me up to like people living wildly different lives than I was, which just was exciting to listen to people talk about creativity in a different way, taking risks in a different way. I was really opening myself up to this kind of realm and space that I'm really passionate about now. And those two podcasts were really monumental. I remember when I was going through this phase, I also gave myself like, okay, at some point, Allison, you need to stop consuming and you need to start doing. And so I gave myself like a month to really just think about all the ideas I was getting from listening to these podcasts. I was keeping a list, right? And then I was like, you need to decide and go all in on one thing. Like, not having your feet in 10 different things and not really giving anything a chance. Because for me, I don't know what led me to thinking this way, but I was like, I will never make money if I don't really like go all in on decide on something. I just need to choose. And so shortly after that, I decided that I was most excited about starting a blog, which might sound boring. If you're listening to this, you're like, starting a blog. But I was really inspired by people who were doing it already. So like Pinch of Yum, it's a food blog, and Barefoot Theory are two of the people that come to mind that were like, that shaped me in wanting to do this. So if you don't know Barefoot Theory, she's also in the outdoor adventure space. She had an outdoor blog. She was making money with her blog. Pinch of Yum is a food blog. They used to publish these income reports. I don't think they do it anymore. But it was really interesting to see the behind the scenes of their blog and how writing made them income when they wrote. And I was like, I can do that. I love writing. And I already actually had a blog because when I had, kind of just started backpacking and I was getting in all these adventures, I had this place where I was kind of more like Dear Diary-ish, writing about my adventures and the places I went. But I was like, okay, I'm going to take that. I'm going to refresh it. And I'm going to start using it as a place to like really give value to people, publish trail guides, tips and tricks. We still actually have the blog today. Blog is still a big part of our business, or not a big part. It's still part of our business. It's a way that we now, in particular, not necessarily like we still make some money from that. But if you're in this space like Google AI, that has kind of transformed what that looks like. But it's still a place for us as a team where we can provide value and free content. Because, when not everyone is able to necessarily invest in our programs right away, or at all. And we still want to have a place where we can teach, and like the podcast is this as well, and our social media, all the things where we can give free value and offer that kind of value and mentorship about the outdoors. So we still run the blog. And so I was like, I'm going to start a blog. And so She Dreams of Alpine blog as a business was officially born. So that was, I don't know exactly the timeline of it, but it was shortly after this kind of like Trans Catalina conversation. So yeah, I had been passionate about the outdoors and backpacking for around 7 years at that point. So I knew that this is something that I could talk on. I had already mentored so many of my friends in this space, and I was like, let's do it. Let's go for it and figure it out. So as I started getting into that, it kind of led me to the next thing. So as I was getting curious about running a blog, running a business, I was learning all the things. I was being really scrappy. Like I knew nothing about running a business. I didn't take business classes in college. I had no idea I was an engineer. So I was really just figuring it out. And I was joining groups. I was signing up for programs to learn more. I've always been a big believer of like, standing, maybe this isn't the right phrase, but like standing on the shoulder of giants. So like people who had done the thing that I wanted to do and learning from them. I like to learn that way because I don't like to just spend a lot of time like wondering if I'm going to learn something from a random YouTube video that I'm watching, because I just found that that wasn't useful. I wanted like somebody with their method and their path, and I wanted to be able to just try it for myself because it had worked for them and see if it worked for me. And that's not always the case. Like sometimes you try things and it doesn't work exactly the same way for you. But for me, it's like somebody's framework that I could follow and implement for myself. So I was doing like that, joining different types of programs. And I remember, I think it was August of 2018, I went to an Amy Porterfield event. Amy Porterfield teaches about digital courses, online business, especially. She was good for me for like at the beginner stage of building my business. And she had this conference, and I went to it and I met these amazing people there. I was so nervous too, y'all. I went to this event. I felt like such a poser and like a fraud. I was like, I have a blog. People were talking about their businesses, being coaches. I was like, I'm a blogger and I write about the outdoors. So y'all, do it even if you feel like like an imposter. So I definitely had major imposter syndrome, but the people were so nice there, and it really opened me up to so many ideas. And I knew from that event and talking to people and attending like different speaker conversations, that's when I knew I wanted to be more than just blogger. And I wanted to help women feel more confident in the outdoors in a way that was like more useful than a trail guide or a few tips and tricks on an article, because you can only share so much on an article, right? And that is where that event was, where the idea for the Backpacking Badass program. And it was kind of like one of those similar feelings I had on the Trans Catalina Trail. It was like the idea came to me at the event, and the Backpacking Badass program, like even the name, I was like, I must bring this forward into the world. Like I just had this knowing that it needed to happen. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to build this course, the Backpacking Badass program. And I knew like what I knew about is like, I knew we needed more women mentorship in the outdoors, because that is something like all of my past, friends that I went backpacking with and hiking with were mostly male. My mentorship was mostly male. And I was like, those people are great. They taught me a lot. But like so many times I felt like not seen, not understood, and that I had to like keep up. Like I had to prove myself. There were so many moments where I felt like, if I don't prove myself at this adventure I was invited on by these guys that invited me, then they would never invite me back. Like, so there was a lot of pressure, and I wanted to create like more focused program for women with women mentorship, so that all these women don't have to worry about that and be afraid of like these things and people looking down on them, all this. I want them to be their own leaders so that they can have control of their own adventurous futures, to say the least. And I wanted to like be someone who like could help them understand their fears, their unique anxieties, their unique self-doubt around everything, all these things that are really normal and natural to feel when you're just starting out on the trail. And even as you grow, like new level, new devil is something I always tell my clients. As you're growing in the outdoors, you're going to reach new levels, and you're going to encounter new fears, new anxieties, and new self-doubt. So basically, I wanted to create the program and the mentorship that I wish had existed when I first started in the outdoors and was super awkward and didn't know what I was doing. I didn't feel outdoorsy or adventurous at all. And I felt silly half the time. And I wanted to like create what I would have loved to have and wish had existed when I started. So that program was a full body yes for me. Like I knew it needed to happen, and I got to work. So I came home from that event, and I was still working my 9 to 5, y'all. So like that's still happening. I'm still an engineer. And now I'm also building this business on the side. And building a business, period, and building a course was probably one of the hardest times I've ever worked in my life. I would, just to give you an idea of like what my day started to look like at that point, like in August, is I started to, at first I was really struggling to like get momentum, but then I realized like I need to commit to this dream in a really tangible way. So I kind of like went home one day to Michael and I was like, okay, I really want to take this business seriously that I'm building. So on Mondays and on Wednesdays after work, I'm not going to be coming home. You're also on your own for dinner. Like, just figure it out. I'm going to go to Starbucks. I'm going to work for a few hours and at least 2 or 3 hours on my business. And then I will come home. It will probably be late. I'll go to sleep and I'll go to my engineering job in the morning. And so I committed to at least have 2 days a week where I would be working at least 3 hours. And then at some point, I was also working a lot of weekends. So I was sacrificing at that time my time in the outdoors and going on adventures. I was missing out on things because I really was passionate to get this thing up and running. And I could see like the vision for putting in the effort. And I was really driven by that. So it was so funny because at this time it was like this thing I didn't even know if people really wanted. And people were telling me like, people thought it was cool that I was doing this thing, but they didn't really take me seriously. They saw it as just this little side hustle. And I kept talking about how like I was going to build this business. And then hopefully after my year off of travel, like I'd be able to stay with it full time. And I just don't think anybody really believed me. They were always talking about like, well, what are your backup plans? Will you come back to engineering if you don't make this work? Nobody really thought I could do it. And I wasn't making any money. Maybe, I don't even think in August I was making like $50 a month. I was making at the end of that kind of like season, maybe $100 to $200 a month from our blog, which is not enough to live on. And so I didn't really have any evidence that it was going to work either, but I just knew I had to give it a shot. So I worked my ass off. Yeah, I worked really hard and I thought I held space for it being worth it. So in April of 2019, after kind of like working a whole season, building this course, getting it ready, learning how to sell a course. I had never sold anything in my life. And that's something you have to do as a business owner. You have to learn how to sell. You have to learn marketing. Because people like, if they don't know how to work with you, then that's your fault. You have to be able to explain how people can work with you, what you offer, all the things. So I was learning that as well. And in April 2019, I opened my program, the Backpacking Badass program, for the very first time. And we enrolled 12 women into the program. And I was thrilled. 12 women took the leap of faith to learn from me, a blogger, a part-time business owner, and full-time engineer. And I will be forever grateful to those 12 women because that was all the proof that I needed to keep going, to keep pursuing this. And I was stoked. Like that was, I think, even more than I had hoped for. I was like, oh, if I just get 3 or 4 people to join this program, I would have been stoked. So in that same month, I had also planned, like when I launched that enrollment to open up the Backpacking Badass program, I also knew I was going to be quitting my job. I had already saved up. Michael and I had saved up for a year. We had enough in the bank to live off of for a year so that we didn't have to put so much pressure on my business to make money while we were traveling. And I was hoping by the end of that year and the end of that savings, I would have enough to live off of, or I would have figured out the business stuff so we could keep doing it. So that same month, I quit my job. So did Michael. We left the security of our full-time corporate paycheck and we leapt greatly into the unknown. So I had to give this dream the shot it deserved. That's what I was thinking. And even though I had no idea what I was doing, and there's really no manual for this kind of thing, especially if your dream is very different. And not many other people were doing it in that particular way. So I was just figuring it out as we were going. And we had gotten our van officially in March, the month before, and Michael was putting finishing touches on the van so that we could live in it full time. And at that time, I was like literally developing the Backpacking Badass program, or delivering, sorry. I had enrolled 12 students, and in May, I was delivering the program as like a live cohort to that first group of women. So we did like live coaching calls. We worked through the program curriculum together. We still do live cohorts from time to time. in our program now, but a lot of times it's like self-paced and then we have ongoing coaching calls. But this first cohort, I did like everything really live because it was my first group. So I'm even like, what's funny is I'm still even close to several of those women today. Like shout out to Heather, who has also gone on some of our She Dreams of Alpine retreats. She's also one of our ambassadors now, which is like basically a mentor inside of our Backpacking Badass group. So yeah, that's a really special group to me that I like think about all the time. Going back to kind of like the timeline of things. So that was May, delivering the program. We had quit our jobs. And then in June that year, Michael and I flew to South Africa to go to the Rocklands. It's like an area in South Africa where we were going to spend a month climbing with some of our friends. That's a trip we had planned and we were super excited about. And then we officially hit the road in our van full time in July of 2019. So we didn't know what life would look like for us after a year. We weren't sure, like, would we run out of money? Would we hate living in a van full time? We hadn't done that. We had lived in it, for weekend things. We were wondering, like, would we regret leaving our 9 to 5? All of it was a huge question mark, but we wanted to give it a shot. All that I knew was that like I was willing to give it everything that I had in order to figure out how to build my own business, how to be financially independent, location independent, and to have more autonomy over my time, because this was my big dream. So even if it meant that I got to my end of my year off of travel and I had to get a 9 to 5 job again, until I figured out how to create a business that could support me, like I was still all in on the dream no matter what, because I believed it would be worth it. So the mountains, I really believe, like one important part of the story that like I haven't really talked about is I think the work that I had done being outdoorsy, adventurous, stepping into that identity, the mountains had prepared me for this moment. The mountains had taught me about risk. They taught me about failure. They taught me about navigating low moments and picking yourself back up when you fell down. Backpacking in the outdoors, it taught me a lot about following my curiosity, because if you remember from part 1 of this story, that paid off big time for me when I went and backpacked Half Dome. So why not follow my curiosity to starting my own business? So that hadn't let me down. It taught me about that. It had led me to some beautiful adventures. And this was kind of like a life adventure I was embarking on. Backpacking had helped me like fear failure less. Like you fail so much in the mountains. You don't make summits. You have a bad trip. You learn a lot of lessons. In climbing in particular, you fail all the time. Like you have a goal climb you want to do, and it's just, you're not there yet. And you'll fall repeatedly. This is just something I really learned and started to embrace as like part of the journey, and really grateful for. It also showed me that there's this concept I talk about a lot, and I'll probably do an episode one day on this, but the 50-50, it's kind of like life is not always good, not always bad. It's this kind of mix no matter where you are in life. There's no fantasy land where it's always great and always wonderful. The mountains taught me that in a like a very tangible way. You go out on the trail and it's fun. You're like, this is beautiful. And then you get on that uphill and you're like, this sucks, right? There is balance. Like we're going to have all of it, and that's all part of the adventure. So for me, I was thinking about that. Like, well, if it's always going to be kind of like a balance of 50-50, no matter what I choose in life, I want to choose the thing that I'm most curious about exploring, right? It taught me also that life is an adventure in general, and I'm never stuck anywhere. And one really important thing it taught me was that I'm braver and more capable than I think I am. Because I remember on that Half Dome trip, I was like, I've never done anything like this. It was the scariest thing in my life, but I was like, I fucking did it. So that taught me like, I am brave and I'm way stronger and more capable than I think I am. So these are all things that kind of led me into entrepreneurship, which I think were very important things that helped me along the way. So the trail had been basically my education for creating a life that was aligned with what I really wanted, which was to have more freedom, to live more courageously, to do creative work. So I really wanted to do something that felt creative, that was exciting to do, and that also gave back value to the community that like means a whole lot to me, which was the outdoor community. So I'm happy to report that, as you can probably tell, because I'm recording this podcast, I'm still here. I'm still doing it. It's 5 years later, and we are still, after that year off, I did figure out how to keep making money and keep building my business. I never went back to my engineering job. I was able to continue being full-time as an outdoor educator, and that evolved and evolved and evolved over the years. So today I've taught over, 1,700 women inside that Backpacking Badass program, which is so wild to think about because just 5 years prior, I was enrolling my first 12 students in that program. And what keeps me going now today, because you get to a point where you're like, okay, like I've done it, like I've proved it, right? I think it's really easy to kind of like get stagnant with things if you're not reigniting that like excitement in your life. For me, what keeps me going is my clients' stories and my clients' wins, and to see so many women from all kinds of backgrounds and walks of life come into this program and any of our other programs and create their own adventurous reinvention. And it's like I get to relive it again through those people, hearing their stories, seeing what they're making of it. So I know that even if I wasn't doing this full time, like even if, for some reason I decided to stop doing this and being a coach and supporting a small team, I know in some capacity I would still be sharing and mentoring in the outdoors in some way, which is why I think, like, for me personally, year after year, I haven't burnt out or I haven't got tired of doing this, because, and this is probably really important, like for me, backpacking was one of the most transformational moments of my life. And I almost feel like this duty and obligation to share that with other women. Because for me, like, it saved me. I was in this, which you can listen to part 1 again, but like I was in this spiral, kind of leading my life down this kind of direction that I didn't want to go anymore, right? And backpacking showed me what I was really made of, and it opened up my world to so much possibility and taught me like I could just be so much more and different than I ever thought I could be. So, as you may know, today, like, we don't just offer the Backpacking Badass program. We do have other things. As a company, we have evolved as a company to offering some more intimate coaching programs and some retreats. We also host like free virtual events all the time. Every year we at least do, like, for example, we usually host a summit in the summer. We're always coming up with new things to give you free value, to ignite your journeys in the outdoors. We also publish free content all the time on our website and our social media to support y'all. But I am going to talk a little bit more about that, like our current offerings, how you can work with us, our programs, in the next episode. That way it's just in like one place that you can find if you're ever curious about how you could work further with me and my team at She Dreams of Alpine. So I'll save that more for then. But one thing has led to the next thing, still really holds true. And I'm really excited to see where that kind of leads me 5 years from now. And even as I'm starting this podcast, like, I never thought I would ever start a podcast, but here we are, right? So as we wrap up this episode, I wanted to leave you with just a few final thoughts, right? So I've left you a lot of thoughts in this episode, so this is just a few more. Some of them are repetitive. The first one is, decide who you want to be and become her. So deep down, most of us know, like, there's something we want to do, something we're curious about that's calling to us, someone we want to become, right? But the thing that kind of holds us back all the time is the unknowns around it, the uncertainty around it, right? But we aren't getting any younger, and the one thing we can't create more of is time, which I'm sure you are all aware of. And I remember when I was sitting at my corporate engineering job and I was at a meeting and we were in a room with a bunch of managers, because I used to do like financial forecasting. So I used to have to present to a bunch of, higher ups in the company. And I was looking around the room and somebody was celebrating their 30 plus years with the company, like their anniversary with the company. And I had personally just reached my 7-year, recently reached my 7 years at the company. And in that moment, I had a moment where I was just like, I don't think I'm meant to be that person. And this is no shade to somebody. We all do what we need to do. for whatever reason, and sometimes it is like we really just love what we do. But for me, I knew like I'm not meant to be here for 30 years. Like I think I meant to do so much more than that. And I don't know, like there was a lot of uncertainty around it. So obviously I didn't get going right after that thought, but the Trans Catalina did pull that courage out of me. And I knew like I had already been thinking this. So whatever it is that's on your heart, just go for it. It will feel scary. It will be uncertain. You will not know what's going to happen. Every great adventure is uncertain. And if you are outdoorsy, if you do get out on the trail, you know this to be true. You can have the best trip plan created. And this is why I always talk about with my clients, like the skill of pivoting in the outdoors is one of the most essential skills that you'll learn as an adventurer. Every adventure has its own agenda. We don't know what it's going to be like, right? So if it feels scary, it feels uncertain, and you're like wanting to live the kind of life that is making you feel more alive and aligned and adventurous, just know you're on the right track. Like, oh, this feels scary and uncertain. Probably doing it right? So don't live your life being too scared to fail, to take leaps into the unknown. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend, there's a lot to this story that, I didn't cover in this episode, and you can feel free to reach out and ask me questions if you want on Instagram or something, but I'm not going to pretend that building a business was easy. I had to overcome a lot in the past 5 years, but especially in that first couple of years, like figuring out how to balance work and travel, managing our finances, trusting the process of growing a business, trying things and then failing, feeling like people weren't listening at all, like weren't interested in you, going big even when it felt scary. These were all things that are happening all the time in my business. Now I have a team. It's like supporting a team, the pressures of being the one where it's all on you. There are a lot of things to learn when you're building a business, right? And so I really had to come to terms with the word failure repeatedly as I set many goals and completely missed them again and again and again. And to this day, I often tend to be an optimist, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. I'll often set goals and I often don't meet them because I'm just really optimistic sometimes. But each and every one of those failures, or quote unquote failures, has led me to a new discovery. It's taught me something valuable and has ultimately made me stronger. And as I've grown, like in my own personal development and, also becoming a life coach, which I did a couple of years ago, I got certified as a life coach. I've just started to understand a little bit more that like sometimes we're in such a hurry to see the success, like stumbled over my words there, of our pursuits. But then when we only focus on the destination, we like miss all of the things that are happening in between. So these days, like I'm really just leaning into the seasons of life that I'm in, the things that I'm learning, where it's leading me next. And that has brought me so much peace. And yes, of course, I'm still setting big goals and I'm still, shooting for the stars and believing in myself and failing and all the things. But like, I'm kind of enjoying that a little bit more than I used to. That's definitely taken time for me to kind of get to that place. So that's it, y'all. That's today's episode. I'm sure there might be questions that you have, but I hope this kind of gave you like a little overview of kind of my adventurous reinvention as far as it goes with building my business, how that I got here, how did I become an outdoor educator, a life coach, all these things. I hope you enjoyed it. Since I am still a new podcaster, I would love it if you could leave me a review if you enjoyed this episode and let me know what you thought. So I will see you next week and talk to you soon. Bye. Hey, I wanted to thank you real quick for tuning into the show and listening all the way to the end. If you love this episode and you want deeper support in becoming a safe, confident, and self-sufficient hiker and backpacker, then head over to shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist. to learn more about our Backpacking Badass coaching program, where I teach you absolutely everything you need to know to be self-reliant on the trails and stop waiting around on others for the adventure invite. So I'd love to help you more in your journey of stepping into your adventurous identity, and that program is the absolute best place for us to start working together. So again, that's shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist. And you can learn all about it there. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you get to spend some time outside this week, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new episode. Bye.